Hello and welcome to Dragon Puppet. My name is Thomas and today we're going to talk about a type of warfare that is rarely mentioned in Warhammer 40,000. Sea-based naval warfare. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But apparently not at sea. Despite the setting being built around conflict and war, there's very little lore and information on what sea battles look like in Warhammer 40,000. Historically, the use of boats has been a core element of military strategy for thousands of years, and have been essential for securing victory in most large-scale conflicts. When I've mentioned this to people, they often say, well, in a sci-fi setting where space battles exist, there wouldn't be much need for sea battles. But I don't think that's entirely true. Water-based vessels are essential for controlling coastlines and sea-based trade routes, as well as offering mobile bases for aircraft and heavy artillery. All this for a fraction of the cost of airships of a similar size, both technologically and in terms of fuel. So first I want to talk about what little information we do have about seafaring vessels in Warhammer 40k. And then we can talk about some reasons why it's probably not mentioned that often. Just before we get into it though, as with most sci-fi settings, the term navy in 40k is used to refer to a space navy. So to avoid confusion, I'm going to use the phrase wet navy to describe a sea-based navy and dry navy to describe a void-based navy. Okay, so there are a handful of mentions and references to sea-based vehicles in the many hundreds of novels set in the 40k universe and the rulebooks and sourcebooks that also cover the setting. Starting small with the audio drama Dead in the Water, where we're introduced to a small patrol boat designated PB-109 that is assigned to Commissar Caiaphas Cain. This vessel is described as about 3 times the size of a Chimera, so roughly 20 meters long, and with heavy bolters mounted on the front and back. The designation PB-109 is a reference to a real-world boat. PT-109 was a boat commanded by a young John F. Kennedy in World War II. Considering that many tanks used by the Imperium are reminiscent of 20th century armoured vehicles, it makes sense that their watercraft share this aesthetic too. Moving up in size, the next wet ship reference I could find was in the short story Vanguard. Skitarii war galleys are boxy vessels that resemble floating fortresses. They are primarily used for transporting infantry and armour using large bow ramps. This is similar to a type of ship developed by many navies in World War II. Skitarii war galleys can hold 100 troops as well as various war machines. They are armed with a turret-mounted las cannon and have sniper nests on the deck. But we can go even bigger. The novel Flesh and Iron by Henry Zhao describes a huge class of seafaring warship called an Argonauticals, and 12 of these vessels make up a combat fleet. The Argonauticals are heavily armed battleships. They have belt armour 280mm thick, similar to battleships from World War II, and are painted a dusty grey-blue, with a tall command tower on the main deck. They are bristling with weapons, including an array of heavy artillery. The book specifically mentions 254mm guns, or 10-inch guns, similar to guns employed by navies and coastal defences in the early 20th century. Despite this heavy armament, the Argonauticals also have room for landing pads for Vulture gunships, and enough space below deck to carry tanks and thousands of infantry. The Nauticals do, however, have some features that deviate from 20th century naval design, like a large ram prow at the bow, similar to Imperial starships, and a hull profile known as tumblehome, where the hull is widest at sea level. This style is rare in modern vessels, but was common in early steel ships of the 1880s. Also, unlike real-life naval vessels, certain areas of an Argonautical are furnished in extravagant luxury, again similar to Imperial starships. As well as surface ships, wet navies employ amphibious craft that can work on land and sea. In the novel Tyrant of the Hollow Worlds, Huron Blackheart commands a fleet of amphibious Capital Imperialis. Capital Imperialis are an ancient type of super heavy battle tank that normally move around on large caterpillar tracks, but the ones employed by Blackheart are also seaworthy and equipped with large propellers. These craft are about 80 meters long with thick armor and a range of weapons, including dozens of las cannons and a single enormous aft-mounted cannon. Another amphibious craft is the Triton pattern gunboat. This ship is mentioned in the novel Caste. These craft are smaller than Blackheart's galleons, but bigger than a patrol boat. And like the galleons, they use caterpillar tracks when they need to traverse the land. Tritons are armed with sponson-mounted autocannons on the port and starboard side, and also have emplacements on the deck for troops to fire from. This novel also features the largest type of wet ship I could find, the Poseidon-class battleship. This massive ship roughly resembles a 20th century battleship, but on a much larger scale. Although it's called a battleship, the Poseidon class boasts a massive landing strip, over 1,000 meters long, making it more of a battleship aircraft carrier hybrid. Going off the description, the main weapon is likely a giant bow-mounted macro cannon, similar to those used on starships. So we've looked at surface ships and amphibious ships, but what about submersibles? In the novel Black Tide by James Swallow, we are shown an Imperial submarine first built during the Great Crusade for use by the Imperial Army, named the Namos. We don't get exact dimensions of the Namos, but it has at least 2 decks and also can support several squads of Space Marines, so it's probably at least as big as some of the bigger submarines employed by modern navies. The Namos is refitted to allow Astartes to operate it, and when the Blood Angels are first presented with the craft, they mistake it for a torpedo or some kind of bomb. It takes a tech priest to explain the craft is designed for underwater use, implying that submarines are not common in the Imperium. The submarine has a few interesting features. It can be deployed from orbit using one-use wings to slow its descent, as well as shock-absorbing crew pods and a shock-resistant bridge to protect its crew during impact with the sea. The Namos is powered by a fusion reactor and armed with powerful energy weapons. Humans aren't the only race to use submersibles though. Back in 2007, Games Workshop released a PDF datasheet to use Orc submersibles in Games of Apocalypse, and they reappeared in White Dwarf 344 and 349. And like all Orc vehicles, there's no standard pattern. The first recorded use of an Orc submersible was during the Third War for Armageddon, invented by mech boy Orgamech on the orders of Ghazghkull Thraka. The Orcs were able to sneak up on Imperial forces who were not expecting an attack from sea, again implying that submarines are a rarely employed technology in 40k. Before I talk about some of the reasons why I think Games Workshop doesn't really mention wet navies in their novels and sourcebooks, I have to mention the Games Workshop World of Warships collaboration, which gave us 4 gorgeously detailed Warhammer 40,000 ship designs. The Ignis Purgatio of the Imperial Navy, the Chaos warship Ragnarok, the Black Templars Cross of Dawn, and the Orc vessel Ship Smasher. I think it's fair to say these ships look great, but obviously they were designed to work within the World of Warships video game, which is about battling with ships from the early to mid 20th century. So I can see why some people don't consider these ships to be canon. But as Aaron Dembski-Bowden said, there is no canon. So if you like them, don't let anybody tell you these ships don't fit in Warhammer 40k. Whilst researching this video, I really enjoyed reading these novels and seeing sea battles depicted in Warhammer 40k. Now, I admit that my love of historical naval warfare does make me a little biased, but I'm surprised that Games Workshop hasn't explored it more. They've made a sea battle game for Warhammer Fantasy, and I'm pretty sure huge warships firing massive guns abides by the sacred rule of cool. So why is there so little love for sea battles in Warhammer 40k? Well, the real answer is probably something to do with the fact that the niche is already being met by space battles. The tabletop game Battlefleet Gothic clearly takes a lot of inspiration from sea battles. If you just pretend the ships are at sea, the rules need basically no adjusting. So Games Workshop don't have a sea-based game for Warhammer 40k because that game basically already exists. The novels often like to explore stories that reflect the tabletop games, so without a sea-based tabletop game, there's not a lot of demand for sea-based stories. In terms of lore, in-universe, I think the main reason that wet navies aren't deployed as much is because due to their huge size, they're basically stuck on the planet that they're built on. A campaign that spans several planets or system will not want to move wet navies from one planet to the next. It would take a massive effort to carry such huge ships in and out of orbit. Although Black Tide does show that wet ships can be deployed from orbit, outside of very specific circumstances, it's pretty inefficient. That being said, that limitation does not apply to planetary defense forces, which are rarely expected to ever leave their planet. As we see in Dead in the Water, Flesh and Iron, and Firecast, if an Imperial planet has oceans or large bodies of water, it makes sense for them to invest in a navy. So sea-based navies do exist in Warhammer 40,000, even if you rarely read about them or see them on the tabletop. This video was a lot of fun to make, and it's got me inspired to maybe kit bash some Imperial or Orcish wet ships, or maybe even a diorama. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in seeing, then let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.